Welcome to the Lessons for Life with Grandma Kate podcast, which is all about real talk and practical tips for building self-esteem, confidence, and self-worth so you can step into your power and live life on your terms. New episodes drop every Thursday, so hit that subscribe button and let's grow together. And if you're loving the show, a quick review helps more people find it. Today, I'm excited to have a guest, Brian Seth Hurst, who characterizes himself as a meta-practical man. Brian has co-authored a best-selling children's book with Olivia Newton-John called The Pig's Tale, and is also the author of the book Whole, W-H-O-L-E. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Hi, Kate. How are you today?
Good. So before we dive in, can you share your journey and what inspired you to write Whole and create the companion book and audiobook?
Yes, I still am in the entertainment industry. And at the time, I had a television show with a reality television company, and the show was focused on the elections. This is back in 2006. I was living on the Illinois-Iowa border, and I noticed when I went to the political rallies that what I heard at the rallies, I never heard on the news. So I had a different experience of the candidates than you would have through the media. And so I thought to myself, well, how do we disintermediate the media? And came up with a show called Determination, and was going to cast millennials, young people, to actually be on the ground and report. Well, it didn't work out that first time, and it more or less crashed and burned. But we said, okay, we'll wait 4 years. So then over the next 4 years, we really worked hard. I put heart and soul into it, left blood on the field, as they say. And the management changed hands at the production company. And because the manager, the CEO who had liked the show in the beginning, they were gone. And so this really wasn't the new guys' show. And I received an email. I was living part-time in Illinois and part-time in Los Angeles. And I received an email saying that the show wasn't going to happen. So that was the second time. And I crashed. I was so upset. I was sitting in the airport in Moline, and I basically said, what do I do now? And I heard, give us 30 days. And at the end of 30 days, you will have a book. And the name of the book is Whole. And so for the next 30 days, I kind of just took dictation. And what I thought was it was dealing with various essays on life, stewardship, detachment, when you feel distant from things. It was just the subject matter. I would get the title and then it would just kind of come through. Sometimes I wrote it on my phone, depending upon where I was. And sometimes I was at my desk. And at the end of 30 days, I did have a book. Wow. And I didn't realize how timely and timeless the information would be. So then, long story short, people kept asking for an audio book. And I was like, okay, well, I'll do it. So I recorded an audio book. And then I went to a friend of mine who was a PR person, and I said to her, hey, how will I market this book? And she, being my friend for 25 years, was completely honest and said, no one is going to want to promote a book that's as old, because it was a decade old. Even if you have an audiobook, why don't you do a workbook? And a bell went off. And I'm big on following the prompts that the universe gives you. Whether they come from within or whether they come from without, if something clicks. So then I said, okay, great. So I'm going to just sit down and I'm going to do an outline of exercises that would allow people to go deeper within each chapter of the book. And then I thought, well, this is going to be interesting. I really don't want to send anyone over the edge while they're doing these exercises, because it's self-exploration. And so then out of my clients, because I've been doing intuitive readings for many years and coaching, helping people make transitions in their life from one phase to another. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to send out an email and I'm going to ask for 50 volunteers to do the exercises as I write them. And it was amazing. The volunteers were terrific. One of them, Elisa Clickinger, actually became the editor of the workbook.
Mm-hmm.
And people who were doing the exercises said that it was life-changing. So then I was like, okay, so this is real. We're going to publish it. We'll get it out in the world. And hopefully my goal is to have it get into as many hands as possible and make a real difference. I'm so in line with your vision and your mission, as you stated at the beginning of the podcast. And the ability to create one's reality through your thoughts and your beliefs. And basically the book itself, if you ask me for an overall, I would say it's about how beliefs define our reality and how we can transform those beliefs.
Yeah.
So there's the backstory. And before that, I had a career in entertainment. I was, a vice chairman at the Emmy Awards. I did write a great children's book with my friend Olivia Newton-John. And, but this was something I think maybe it's not just me, but as you mature, maybe suddenly it's about doing meaningful work in the world. They say there are 3 phases, Kate. There's learn, earn, return. And return is when you give back. And I think I'm just crossing that line. Not from the earn to the learn, from the learn to the return.
And I'm so with you on that. That's where I'm at in my life too. But I have a question. So had you had that experience of being inspired to write before? Or was that just like you'd kind of had it off and on and just, I'm always curious.
I have always written. I've always kind of tried to follow the inspiration. I had written short pieces, articles, and things like that before, but there was something so overwhelmingly compelling about this, and I just decided to go with it. And it was a very easy process. I would that the workbook had been so easy. That took 2 years. But it's so challenging, I think, sometimes. And to follow that instinct. And in the introduction to the book, I talk about how I argued. Like, who's going to read this book? What difference is it going to make? How am I going to get it out in the world? What, blah, 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 just arguing back and forth and constantly hearing, forget your considerations and just continue. And so, So, I have been inspired to do, I think, everything in my, probably much to the frustration of my parents, everything I've chosen in life, I've been inspired on a path to follow. And what I realize is it was part of a much larger purpose. So what it looked like to me first was a lack of focus. But then when I landed on purpose, which for me is to connect and engage authentically and inspire, then I realized, well, I had been living on purpose in that context my entire life. And I've always kind of pushed the limits. Honestly, Kate, I was the kid, if you said you can't do that, I would prove you wrong. I was the kid, if my mother said, don't go beyond this point, that I would wait till she wasn't looking and then go beyond that point. So,
So you have mentioned, and it's in your book too, about self-limiting beliefs. And I was just wondering, maybe we could talk a little bit about that. So what is a self-limiting belief? And maybe you could give us some examples for people, because I know people hear it, but I always find it's interesting to hear it from another person's perspective, because when we hear that, somebody will say something and I'll be like, oh, that's what all those other people meant. So what is your right?
Well, I have a few takes on it. My partner in life, I once said, well, I don't think I can do that. And he said to me, well, certainly not with that attitude. So that is in its simplest form. That is it. It's that you think you can't, but maybe you can. So there's an exercise in the book. I call it the belief grid. And down the left-hand side of the grid, you put the 10 most influential people in your life. And then across the top are different categories: family, creativity, money, work, sexuality. And then what you do is you just fill out what you take your first thought, and you fill out the beliefs that you think that person had. So if it's your mother is the first in line, your mother thought family is, and let's just say, the most important thing. Okay. Then you continue filling out, you take your first thought and you fill out the whole grid. Then you put the grid away for a day or two, and you pull the grid out and you look at those beliefs that you are living from, that you've adopted, whether you wanted them or not.
Okay.
And because I call those beliefs that are operating, those are the human operating system. And so then in the 11th row is your name, and you can modify those beliefs. So, for example, in my own life, my dad grew up poor. So there was never enough money. There's not money for this. So that belief, there's not money for that, that was just in there, and I might have acted consciously or unconsciously or been always afraid that there wouldn't be enough, or because that was the belief that I learned. And that's what the belief that I carried with me. And one thing uh, in a book by Wayne Dyer, he talks about how a mother came home and she had a terrible headache from work, and the child was all happy and singing, and the mother screamed at her and said, "Stop singing, you have a horrible voice." And from then on, her self-expression was stuffed and repressed, even to the point of not just singing, but talking. So we never know what those single moments are or
Yeah.
what beliefs we're taught. So when I talk about self-limiting beliefs, it's not that just oh, I can't do that, or I would never be able to do that, which is often there, or I don't have enough time to do that. I don't have enough money to do that. I mean, the list is endless. And it's catching yourself in that conversation as well.
Mm-hmm.
So on the one hand are the beliefs that you've taken on,
Mm-hmm.
and you have the power to change that mindset and change that belief. And on the other hand is the self conversation that goes on in the way that you speak to yourself about what's possible and about what's not possible.
So those self-limiting beliefs could be either positive or negative, so moving you forward or holding you back, right?
Well, if it's a belief that's moving you forward, it's not self-limiting.
Oh, true. Okay,
It's
yes.
promoting growth.
Yes.
But sometimes those self-limiting beliefs are in the unconscious, like you don't even know you do it.
Yep. Yep.
And so that awareness of that conversation that you're having in your head, that
Yep.
conversation can be changed. It takes work. I call it like spiritual chiropractic adjustment. So like the longer it's been out, the more attention you have to pay to it to put it where you want it.
So what if somebody's stuck and puts pen to paper or wants to, and that self-talk talks them out of writing that? You know what I'm saying? Because I've had this experience in the past. I want to make this list, and sometimes we just don't know how to get started.
There's a quote by William F. Murray: "Whatever you can do or believe you can do, begin it now. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it."
Mm.
So you have to discipline yourself, I guess, to step beyond that belief.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's a lot of self-doubt, then what I do is I journal. I write about that self-doubt. I acknowledge those
Yeah.
feelings so
Mm-hmm.
that I can get them out. And instead of running them around as a loop in my head,
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay, how am I? Actually, that's how I start my day: is how am I feeling right now? And that's
Mm-hmm.
how I end my day. How am I
Mm-hmm.
feeling right now?
Mm-hmm.
Because those feelings I'm entitled to them. They're mine.
Mm-hmm.
I might think they're good feelings or bad feelings, but even if there are bad feelings, there might be something that I get to learn out of that.
Yeah.
So I try to look at the benefit of just feeling in generally. A lot of
Yeah.
people don't want to feel anything, and I
Yeah.
get that, especially
Yeah.
since it might lead to a perceived loss of control
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or a risk. Like for a long time, I came from the "I'll never let him see me sweat" school. And I was sexually abused as a kid, so there's a wall that I was able to put up very, very quickly and
Mm-hmm.
stuff my feelings just for the sake of survival.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
now that I'm an adult, maybe I don't need those coping mechanisms anymore. And for
Mm-hmm.
me, that was like, well, you know what? That was a trauma. Let me find a great trauma therapist and
Mm-hmm.
walk through this so that I have my life rather than it having me,
Yeah.
so that I'm not grabbed by the collar and dragged into the past, so that I can be present.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And in the book, you also talk about habits.
Hmm.
So tell us about habits, and do you see a relationship between self-limiting beliefs and habits?
Yeah, it's interesting. There are habits and patterns.
Okay,
And
yeah.
And I know that there are good habits and bad habits, and I know that it takes an awareness of a habit. For example, if I have a habit that is conducive to me stuffing my feelings,
Mm-hmm.
um, say eating,
Yep. Yep.
that I'm not really aware of my feelings, so I'm just going to eat those feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe before I eat that entire pint of ice cream, I can ask myself, wait a minute, how am I feeling right now? What am I feeling right now? What do I need right now? Where do I feel I'm not being supported? What is this? So that that habit is not just something that I do and I just pick
Mm-hmm.
up.
Mm-hmm.
A pattern to me is, for me, it's a way of dealing with something or not dealing with something. So if my pattern is that every time I'm confronted with something, I change the subject, that's the pattern,
Okay. Yep.
even, and then it's just looking at and not judging it.
No.
Kate, it's so important to just
Mm-hmm.
say, okay, this
Yeah.
is what I do. I might not know
Mm-hmm.
why I'm doing it, but
Mm-hmm.
it's what I'm doing. And
Mm-hmm.
I've had moments, I think other people have too, where you go, wow, I don't really like myself right now. I don't like how I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
reacting to this. I don't like what I'm doing. Well, the thing is, I can look one step deeper and go, there's a motivation here.
Yeah.
Is my motivation to keep from feeling pain? Is my motivation to manipulate the other person? Am I being motivated by fear? Why do I want to do this? Especially if someone has hurt me,
Yeah.
my initial response is to want them to hurt too.
Yeah.
And so to stop that and say, okay, well, my motivation is that I want them to feel the same amount of pain that I did, instead of just saying, wait a minute, that might not have been personal. That might have been just the way they are. Or wait a minute, I need to say to them, I want to stop you right now, because if your intention was to hurt me or was not to hurt me, I need you to know that that hurt,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and to be able to kind of process that out.
Mm-hmm. And that takes courage to do that.
I believe everyone is made of strong stuff. I believe that resilience is built in.
Mm-hmm.
Compassion, maybe not so much,
Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
believe resilience is built in. If you look at me and you go, well, if that person went through it and they're still standing, I can go through it and I can still stand. So, yeah, people who are listening to your podcast are not inherently courageous. Otherwise, why would they be listening?
I know one of my mottos is be the inspiration. And that's kind of what you just alluded to. If we live our lives and live it to its fullest, because I'll talk a lot about with in my podcast is be the role model. And as parents, because our kids are always watching us, the way we flick our hair or the way we public speaking, our voices, our mannerisms, like kids are always watching. And we need to set that example in being courageous, setting boundaries. How do we deal with conflict and personal growth, much as what you're talking about? Like, am I the kind of person that is going to do the beliefs? And we need to be that more for our kids, I think.
So it's so serendipitous that you were saying this, because very long story short, I returned to my dream. I was a performer 40 some odd years ago, and I returned to performing after 40 years. And so I've done a one-man show and I continue to do it, but I continue to do these open mics, so that I can keep things up. And a song I always wanted to sing was Children Will Listen by Stephen Sondheim. And
Wow.
so I
Yeah.
have been working on that song, and I've been working on the revised version that Barbara Streisand sang, which starts out, how do you say to your child in the night, nothing's all black, but then nothing's all white? How do you say it will all be all right when you know that it mightn't be true? What do
Mm-hmm.
you do? And then the lyric goes to, careful the things you say, children will listen. Careful the
Yeah.
things you do, children will see and learn.
Mm-hmm.
Children see and learn. Children may not obey, but children will listen.
Mm-hmm.
Children will look to you for which way to turn, to know what to be. careful before you say, listen to me. Children will listen.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
it goes on beyond that, which is careful to spell or careful the wish you make, wishes your children. Careful the path they take, wishes come true, not free. Careful the spell you cast, not just on children. Sometimes the spell will last past what you can see and turn against you. Careful the tale you tell, that is the spell. Children will listen.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's brilliant.
Yes. Parents, you don't get the manual on parenting, that's for sure. And we all make mistakes, but it's that learning curve. And I think that's, if kids can see parents learning or parents trying, then that speaks volumes in itself too. Back to habits. So many people struggle with habits. And I know we were talking earlier too. I could relate when you were talking about the diet one, because one of the things, eating chips, like we mindlessly eat chips, right? We'll just hand to mouth, hand to mouth. And like, that's just a habit we've created. And now we have to break the habit if we don't want to eat all those chips. So is there exercises?
Yeah, I don't know that the book addresses chips. But I think that, habits that are inherently self-destructive, those habits, I think one needs support. It's like you need the tools, and there'll be different tools for different people. I don't think that one size fits all. It's just like I feel about spiritual information. I don't think there's anything new in my book that hasn't been said over generations and even in ancient times. But it's the way it's said that resonates with some people, but might not resonate with others. So gaining the tools that you need. For example, if eating chips is part of a larger reality of overeating, then maybe it's time to get support for that, to find out what is at the root of overeating. And to not look at it as a sickness or something that's horrible, but something that needs to be supported in order to grow through and learn from. And I don't think you grow through or learn from by making yourself wrong or judging yourself harshly or putting yourself in the position where other people will judge you harshly, especially if you're doing the best you can. So many times when I work with parents, my question that I ask them is, do you believe that you were doing the best that you could with the knowledge and experience you had at the time? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is yes. So working through habits, or you use the word mindless, and basically once you're conscious of something, then you're at choice. So if you're aware, then you have a choice to make. The choice I would make would be not to buy the chips and have them in the house. And then the other thing is just like with, what am I thinking about? What is going on with me? Why am I doing this? Am I eating to fill a void? Is there an emptiness I'm feeling right now? Or am I eating because I'm stressed out and I need comfort? I need to be comforted. So I need that mac and cheese right now because that's what especially in my family, it was eat something, you'll feel better. Didn't work. We said all the time, eat something, you'll feel better. I ate something to feel better all the way up to 200 pounds.
Yeah, and it's so much like what you're talking. Self-awareness is so huge as to.
But you've got to compare that. You've got to pair that with self-compassion.
Yes.
Those two things together, because you could be aware of something and just beat yourself up over it, and that'll create more friction. But to say, okay, there's something going on.
Yeah.
There's something I'm feeling more deeply. There's something I need here. And also, just as a side note, I make sure that I have go-to sources of inspiration or comfort. Like Kristen Neff's book, Self-Compassion, I recommend that all the time. That's a book that I will go to. can take things really personally. So I will go to Don Miguel Ruiz's The Four Agreements just to read that second agreement, don't take things personally, over
Yeah.
again to remind myself. I
Yeah.
will ask the universe for objective perspective. Like, am I
Mm.
not seeing something here?
Mm-hmm.
Let me just see if I can have, because something is always working in my favor, whether I
Yeah.
see it or not, or whether I'm willing to tell the truth about it or not. So even in the worst of circumstances where something may really, really hurt, I'm going to have that hurt. I'm going to have those feelings. I'm also going to train myself to ask, okay, what is going on here? And is there something positive that I can take away from this?
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, and actually,
Mm-hmm.
you and I were talking before the call, we were talking about technology and technical support before. And I was so aggravated at the lack of technical support that I was getting today that I just completely gave up. And I was like, there has to be, in my mind, I'm going, there has to be a workaround. There has to be an answer. And then
Mm-hmm.
my other half walked in and he said, what if you did this? So all of a sudden the answer came. I was struggling. I was fighting for it. So I couldn't see it,
Yeah.
and here it was delivered from someone else that said, have you thought of this? No, I hadn't, but that's a good idea. I will do that. And it worked.
Sometimes we can be our own worst enemy, eh?
When you lose something, Kate, and you're looking and you're looking and you're looking and
Yeah.
you're looking and you're looking and you can't find it, and
Yeah.
finally you
Yeah.
give up and it
Yeah.
shows up. I use
I
that
know.
analogy all the time, which is I am fighting for this. I am struggling for this. I got to give up for a minute.
It's when our mind calms down. I always say, help me to see what I can't see. So in other words, I'm just so frantic about finding something that I just get in my head. And then all of a sudden I just take that deep breath and then it's just
Sometimes
there.
I say, help
Yeah.
me to see what I'm unwilling to see.
Ooh, that's a good one too. That's a good one too.
Because I
Yes.
might not want to, it might hurt too much, or I might want to protect myself.
Values. You also talk about values. I never grew up with values in my household. And I probably lived by some, but it was never called values. So are there exercises?
No, it's the second chapter. So a lot of times, I mean, you grew up with values. You probably didn't know what they were. They probably weren't called that. But for me, one of the most important values in my life was imparted by my parents, which was integrity,
Mm-hmm.
to tell the truth. The other one was consideration for others.
Mm-hmm.
My mother was the head of a charity in Philadelphia where I grew up for a time. And when we were little, we were taken to volunteer so that we would learn that. So in the workbook, it asks you to find those values. And so I used integrity. Integrity means being true to myself and true to my word. It means that I keep my word to myself as well as others. Integrity means that I can be trusted to do whatever I consider to be the right thing, even when no one else knows I'm doing it. So I name the value, then I define it. And then I ask you to name the value and then define it. So the reason I don't completely define those values is because that's the opportunity for you to look.
Mm.
And that's
Yeah.
the opportunity for you to begin to trust what's coming up from you.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second exercise in that thing is, where do you feel you've made a difference in the lives of others? And the
Oh, that's
purpose of that is for you to see your own value that's
mm-hmm.
coming out of your values. So if you've made a difference in someone else's life, it's because of your values that you have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then the next part of that, it says, how do you see yourself? Your truth, how you see yourself, will be how the world sees you, and there will be no need to prove or convince the world of your value. People see the truth with their hearts. There's no need for them to be sold on it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it asks you to do that exercise. And then most of the exercises in the workbook, Kate, have a real world application. Like, it's okay. Like, how do I take what I've learned out into the world?
Mm-hmm.
And at this one, it says, don't sell. The next time you find yourself in circumstances where you feel the need to sell yourself, shift into stillness and listening mode. Rather than talking about yourself, shift the conversation and make it about the other person. If the other person is, quote, present, unquote, they will ask about you. Then you can answer their questions from a centered place, knowing you really have nothing to prove, but only to be. If the other person does not ask about you, then you will know that it is likely that they will not be available to the quality of relationship that reflects your values. This does not make them a bad person. It's simply where they are in their lives, and chances are they are working very hard to prove their value and worth.
Mm-hmm.
So that whole chapter that's about value, it's also
Mm-hmm.
about values and how one values oneself.
Yeah.
And I think one of those challenging things to do sometimes is remove yourself from a situation where you aren't valued,
Yeah. Yeah.
because you'll get to resentment, you'll get to, victim me, like they don't respect me and they don't treat me right and blah blah blah, but it's
Mm-hmm.
that you might not be valuing yourself, and so then you're not valued.
That's very true. And just to take a step backwards a bit, going through values, that could be something a family could do together, maybe at an easier level, like kindness. And that would be
Mhm.
cool to have the kids look up the word, or depending on the age, or define kindness in their own family unit, and then go out and act on kindness and that.
I never thought about that. I mean, people have mentioned that they're going to form groups, and I'm actually experimenting with something right now, which is forming support groups around the workbook, because just like working out alone in your house
Yeah.
is challenging. Sometimes when you're
Mm-hmm.
working out at the gym, even if you're not
Mm-hmm.
working out in a group, you
Mm-hmm.
feel like you're in the
Yeah.
zone. So creating groups that can be supporting. I'm doing a couple of those to see how that works out. We're going to cover 5 chapters at a time with the
Yeah.
same group of volunteers,
Okay.
and to see how that works out. But people have mentioned to me they want to do the workbook with a group of their friends. And I never actually thought about doing the workbook as a family, but that's not a bad idea.
You can talk about self-worth and helping your child to understand, because it's not the external validation, it's the internal validation. And what I do to help kids is I volunteer at a school with reading. And one of the things I get the kids to do is see improvements since we first started back in September for us. I'm in Canada. Do you see that in yourself?
Yeah.
So even if they don't see it in the moment, I'm planting that seed as, oh, yeah, okay. And they might think about it later on during the day. Because if we don't have it when we're little and kids, we carry that low self worth into our adulthood. And then we're doing exercises.
There's in that same song,
Mm-hmm.
uh, it says in the bridge, what do you say to a child who's in flight? Don't slip away and I won't hold so tight. What can you say that no
Mm-hmm.
matter how slight won't be misunderstood? What do you leave to a child when you're dead? Only whatever you've put in its head. Things that
Right.
your mother and father had said that were left to them too.
Mm-hmm.
Careful what
Mm-hmm.
you say. So it's generational. It's
It
passed
is.
down. And the awakening of self-discovery without self-punishment,
Mm-hmm.
self-discovery
Mm-hmm.
is the chance to relearn, to learn something new, to parent differently.
Mm-hmm.
Both my parents came from single parent households.
Mm-hmm.
So they really didn't know what it was to have joint parenting.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so they learned,
Mm-hmm.
and we took whatever we took away from it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, it's generational. It's passed down. Beliefs are generational.
They are generational and they can have negative consequences. And I grew up in a household that was emotionally unstable, and it took me decades to figure it out. I knew there was something not right, but I lost my voice until I kept persisting, and I had to figure out there had to be a better way. This wasn't right. And I've spent years in personal growth, and finally it seems in the last 2 or 3 years everything has kind of come together for me.
Going to a musical, you can
Yeah.
tell I was raised in musical theater in South Pacific. The lyric is, you've got to be taught to be afraid of people whose eyes are oddly made. You've got to be taught. You got to be taught to be afraid of people whose eyes are oddly made, and people whose skin is a different shade. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught before it's too late, before you were 6 or 7 or 8, to hate all the people your relatives hate. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be carefully taught.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's and then that goes back to being the role model for our kids. It's all interweaved. So we're getting close to wrapping up, but if there's one thing you want to leave with the listeners, what would that one thing be?
Two things. I would say don't be afraid of feeling, because underneath the feeling is your intuition and your healing. And the work works. So like when you do self-exploration and self-discovery, it may be challenging, it may be painful at times, but just like your readers, you've got to acknowledge your progress. Most of the time, I think, at least in Western society, we look at where we aren't instead of where we are.
Yeah.
There's always another mountain to climb, but you're gaining skills and you'll be a better mountain climber. The more you know your instrument, the more you know yourself, the easier that mountain will be to climb. It's like being in spiritual shape to climb the spiritual mountains. Yeah. And if people want to know more about the books, or they want to have access to the support groups that might be formed, they can find everything about the books at wholelifebook.com, where you can see the workbook and the book and the audiobook. I love the audiobook. I don't have an issue with my own voice. I just pretended somebody else. And when I listened to that audiobook, I was like, wow, this is important.
Yeah.
And then our largest community group that's forming is forming on Facebook, which is facebook.com/wholethebook. And on Instagram, it's at whole_lifebook.com. And my personal site is briansethhurst.com. But
Perfect.
Yeah,
and I just want to confirm, because whole can be spelled two different ways.
Yes.
Okay, so it's WHOLE, whole,
Yes.
as in a wholeness. Yes.
Yes.
And I think grace is such a beautiful word. You know, like all that we've talked about is just give yourself grace as you're going through the changes or journaling. And awesome, Brian. Well, it's been a pleasure having you as a guest, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you. And I wish you all the best as well. And, you know, it's Grandma Kate, and I want to tell you that I learned more from my grandmother, just not only about life, but about baking. And baking as the analogy for life, you know, to pay attention to the ingredients and the timing, and that certain things alter things. It's like everything is a recipe. And what are you going to put into the mix? And I learned that my grandmother was a tremendously courageous human being, tough as nails. But I learned a lot from my grandma, because she wouldn't let you know that she didn't know. She did know.
Yeah.
And she was always right. She would always point like this and tell you, and you knew and she was right, because she was her experience. She lived her experience and shared her experience.
And that's a whole other topic. And maybe we better get you back, because grandparents are so influential in a child's life or in the family. And we live so far apart nowadays. I'll have to have you back, Brian, and we'll get into that topic. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me. What
Thank
a pleasure.
you.